Hi guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome to another episode of Food Exposed. In today's video we're going to be looking at the organic and what does actually organic means in the United Kingdom. Since I've started doing my Food Exposed videos, I do get loads of messages for you asking me to have a look at certain things, and organic is there right in the top of the list. So in today's video guys, we're going to be looking at the organic, but we're only going to be covering the fruits and vegetables in this instance. And then at a later date, I will do the video which will cover the organic meats and other things. So with everything that's currently happening in the food industry, I totally understand why people now actually questioning the organic meaning. But there are still some people that buy organic all the time because they think of the practices or whatever the organic technically meant to mean is better for the environment and better for everything else. Well, we'll look at that in a minute. But generally, people think that, well, organic is totally pesticide free. Wrong. You think the organic is totally GMO free? Wrong. You think it's vegan? Totally wrong. So you see where I'm coming from with this one, okay? There's a lot of misconception that people assume that organic things are better and fresher, but just wait until we dive into the video. So I've got the list in front of me and we're going to be concentrating or covering 10 points that Soil Association wouldn't want you to know. And it's going to be very brief, but it's going to be very much straight to the point. So first of all, you'll be aware that the organic will carry their own logo, and quite often the organic produce is actually certified by the Soil Association. There's a lot of information about what the Soil Association do, what they're trying to achieve, but generally they're kind of looking at the impacts of agriculture on the environment and try to make sure that the produce that farmers are growing kind of fits within a certain level without the affecting the environment too much. Nonetheless, I actually found that the Soil Association is actually a charity rather than the governing body, which I found somewhat rather surprising. Maybe it's not relevant, but I kind of just thought about it that it's a little bit strange. But nonetheless, guys, so we've got the 10 points that we're going to be covering here. So first of all, right, let's kick off with the pesticides. So there are people that will think the organic produce is totally pesticide free. Well, it is totally wrong. There are pesticides that are allowed under the Soil Association, okay, and still could be called organic. So there are a few there, okay, but they are non-synthetic ones, but they are still pesticides nonetheless. However, right, so this is some examples of what's actually allowed. So we've got the pesticide called pyrethrin, I think, hopefully I pronounced it correctly. So it's toxic to bees and the aquatic life, okay? We're talking about the organic produce and it's, you know, pesticide is toxic to the bees and aquatic life. Copper sulfate, so it builds up in the soil and harms worms and any other little critters that could live in the soil. Third one, it's BT. I can't even pronounce this one, but it kills the caterpillars and the butterfly larvae. Okay, it's kind of understandable because the caterpillars could ruin everything, but nonetheless. So those, amongst other pesticides, are actually allowed under the Soil Association. So we're talking about the vegan. A lot of people think that, again, the organic produce is totally vegan. Again, it couldn't be further from the truth. So the most organic vegetables, okay, are sprayed with some animal by-produce and things like the fish emulsion, blood and bone meal, and manure from the factory farmed and sometimes GMO fed. Again, okay, the Soil Association allow you to have this, or allow farmers to do this, but they do not have to specify this on a label. So if you're vegan and if you've solely been choosing to buy the organic produce thinking that it's not sprayed with any pesticides or any fertilizers, then unfortunately you are wrong. So moving on to the GMO, okay, yes, it is not directly GMO, but okay, if the farmers are growing whatever crops, so they're going to spread some manure on them, and manure from animals that could have been fed the GMO. Again, the compost or soil, okay, could also be having indirect GMO inside it. So basically, again, if you thought it's non-GMO, yes, okay, this is not directly, but the GMO contaminated produce around your produce, it's potentially could still be there. All right, next thing, we're talking about the Soil Association certification. Isn't really as fully transparent as you'd want it to be. So despite their reputation, the growers for fruits and vegetables may still use animal remains as a fertilizer, plastic mulch, okay, covering the soil to protect it from the weeds, animal tested inputs and the infrequent inspections. Okay, so again, the people that choose the organic for those sort of reasons will assume that it's, you know, it's really pure and cruelty free, but couldn't be further from the truth. So when we're talking about, again, like plastic covering the soil, again, it might sound like nothing and very basic, but again, a lot of people choose organic for a different reason. And one of those reasons is because the Soil Association claim that obviously what they're trying to do is to make sure that the farming is sustainable and is not harmful to the environment. Well, of course, guys, if we're talking about the plastic that is covering the soil and it sits there, you know, in the sun, in the rain, plastic does deteriorate and is quite often only single use. So that means that microplastics will be leaching into the soil, they grow in their produce, and of course, at the end of the season, the plastic will end up in a landfill. So the next one is we're talking about the organic doesn't mean a residue free, and by residue I do mean some harmful chemicals or harmful pesticides. Again, we're talking about things like a drift by the wind from the neighboring farms that do not grow organic, things like the pesticide traces from the compost, and of course we're talking about the storage chemicals, because again, after organic vegetables are harvested, they still do have to sit in certain areas before they go to the supermarket, whether this for ripening or purely to the fact that it's not time for them to go and hit the shelves just yet. So again, if you think they're totally pesticides free, unfortunately it's not the case. So now we're coming on to the point number 6. Again, a lot of people choose the organic because they think it's far more sustainable. Well, okay, sustainable in certain ways maybe, but so organic farming generally yields 20 to 30% less of crops. Okay, so more land will be needed to grow those certain crops, and the higher energy and water per fruit or vegetables grown long term. So again, if you think about the sustainability, well, we're talking about the lack of farmers' land anyway. Again, and it is a slightly different matter, and I totally understand that. But for people that think it is a little bit more sustainable because you grow vegetables without using pesticides, well, in fact, you do. And unfortunately, they do require far more space for a less of a yield. So the next one, we're talking about the plastics and microplastics. I did unfortunately jump the gun and we already talked about the plastic covering the weeds as a weed control. So yes, the full fact is when they cover this, microplastic do get in the soil, and then unfortunately the stuffs end up being in a landfill. So, okay, another thing, the organic fruits and vegetables, they're not always, the ones you see them in the supermarket, they're not always come from the United Kingdom, okay? And they will still carry the Organic Association, the logo, or just the organic logo. Again, if you follow the channel, you'll know that we've discussed that sort of thing many times, and we talked about it with the Mark, the bowler hat farmer, where the produce comes from a different countries, and it comes in what they call a packing house, and they basically say, let's call it a cabbage comes in from Spain. The farmer tells you it is organic, so it comes in this country, comes in a packing house, gets repackaged, gets the organic stamp on it, puts the potentially saying grown in UK, and off it goes in our shelves. So, well, a lot of the UK organic produce is actually also imported from a different country. Things like China, Eastern Europe, Turkey, and many other countries, where again, their controls on the organic farming will be totally different. And yes, of course, many of you would think, well, but there's got to be strict checks and that sort of thing. But again, it is not always happening. So even if the produce comes from a different country with the organic stamp, you cannot guarantee in some instances that it's actually organic at all. Again, so on the number 9 point, we're talking about the labor and standards of working, be it specifically concentrating in the United Kingdom. Again, many people think that the organic farms are really well controlled and really well run, where people do, their jobs and get paid loads of money because, well, it is the organic farming after all. They have to look after everybody. But again, this is not entirely the case. So the people quite often that work on the organic farms, I still earn very little. They lack protection and they lack training when it comes to using the pesticides or whatever they're spraying on the fields. So because unfortunately the Soil Association doesn't cover the welfare of the farmers in this instance. And then, guys, we're moving on to the point number 10, which is the last one. It's kind of a little bit interesting one. Well, they're all interesting, to be fair. But again, even to myself, if I would say, well, the organic produce, and you half of the time just expect it to be fresh, almost as just freshly picked from the fields and put on your shelves. Well, again, this is unfortunately could not be further from the truth. So we're talking about the storage, okay? So the produce, okay, organic produce could be stored for months, okay, before entering the supermarket shelves. And it goes for all of the other fruits and vegetables. We know, okay, there is a backlog, say in the back of a supermarket or in the warehouses where the fruits and vegetables stocked in the cold storage. So this is quite often you might find with the apples or bananas or certain other fruits. When they arrive to the supermarket shelf and they look nice and shiny, ripen at home type thing, you bring it home, you put this in your fruit bowl, and rather it's actually ripening, it just goes manky because it's been almost frostbitten by too long of a cold storage. And unfortunately, the organic produce is no different from that. It can still sit in the warehouse for months and months. Sometimes as well, they pick them early, okay, so they will sit there to ripen, okay, be it in a slightly warmer conditions or in a cold storage. But the point is, your organic produce is not fresh off the field straight to the supermarkets. Everything else is applicable like it is to all of the other normal produce. And as well, at the same time, the last bit is there is when it's grown into the overworked or again plastic covered soil. Again, we all know that the when you grow a lot of fruits and vegetables commercially, after a while the soil does get overworked. You know, it loses its nutrients and all sorts of things. And this is why generally big sort of farmers do spray fertilizers and other sort of things to put on fruits and vegetables to make sure that the things grow better. And obviously with the organic, so in this instance, they either grow them, you know, with the specific fertilizers and pesticides, and quite often in the soil that has a lot or very little to give, in fact. So when you're choosing your organic produce and you think the organic quality or the fruits and vegetables will be better because they're full of nutrients, they're full of vitamins, well, in this instance, the organic, unfortunately, not any better for you than anything else you buy in the supermarket. So there we are, guys, right? Hopefully that answers the questions. I kind of kept it really brief, but literally just covered the bullet points of what that means, because I know, as I said, many of us can't really trust anything anymore. And to be fair, after kind of looking at this, I'm not really surprised. This is not sort of a lot of information that's floating about out there. Yes, all of those companies trying to preach and say, yes, it's great, we buy organic, you know, we need to support the organic farmers because, you know, the food is better, the food is fresher, it is so great for the environment and that sort of thing, you know, but it clearly isn't. So if you're one of those people that always bought organic because you thought it's better for you, well, it is totally wrong. If you thought, you know, you bought this because there's no pesticides in them, well, again, you are unfortunately totally wrong. So there we are, guys. I hope you have found this video helpful or interesting. Please don't forget thumbs up, subscribe if not a subscriber. Don't forget to check out all my other food exposed videos, and I shall see you very soon. Bye bye.